burned in her periphery and clouded her vision. None of her attacks landed. They hit Steven's afterimages every time. "Aren't you ashamed to fight me in this small room? If you're confident in your abilities, let's take this outside." Steven shattered the window with a wave of his hand. "Sure, if that's what you want." Bianca looked outside and noticed the cars parked in the courtyard. The hotel was surrounded. She leaped out of the window and scaled the wall to the rooftop. Some of the Leviathan unit members were waiting there. They unsheathed their swords and rushed at her. Her short dagger was overpowered fairly quickly. Steven rejoined them on the rooftop and watched the fight from the edge. "What's the point in working for Warhawk? Your talents are wasted there. Why not work for the U.S.? His words confirmed Bianca's guess. So he was from the United States. "How did you know about our operation? You even had time to set up this trap." "Is it really so strange? Cadus is our ally now. Warhawk can forget about messing around in this country from now on." As Bianca dodged and ran across the rooftop, she listened to the sounds of battle inside the hotel. It wasn't as loud as before. The commotion was faint, and she could barely hear anything. It seemed like those modified prisoners weren't that useful after all. Trey dashed through the hallways and rushed into every room like a whirlwind. His arm burned brightly with the killin's flames as he threw punches at the prisoners. They recovered in no time, but they still felt the pain. It was real and paralyzing. As the cycle of destruction and recovery repeated, the prisoners weakened little by little. When they attempted to slice Trey's arm, the flames deflected their swords. "What's that fire? And is that a prosthetic arm? It's impenetrable!" Trey gave them unimpressed looks. "You're slow on the uptake. Potions and technology don't make you invincible. You're not getting out of this." "Then what ability do you have?" they retorted. "Our regeneration gives us the upper hand." The Leviathan unit members who were standing nearby as backup were getting impatient as the fight dragged out. They threw out their chains, looping them around the prisoners. Before they could struggle free, the Leviathan unit inserted the other end of the chain into the power outlet on the wall. A crackling current surged up the chains and electrocuted the prisoners. Their skin was charred, and their clothes were burnt. Trey drew his sword and severed their limbs, tossing them out the window. There were limits to their regeneration, and at some point, their bodies would no longer be able to recover. He settled the battles in the other rooms using the method. Bianca, who was on the rooftop, was being suppressed by the defensive array. A chill shot up her leg and spread through her body. She looked down and noticed a strange glowing pattern beneath her feet. A thick layer of frost accumulated on her joints, freezing her in place. Steven struck the back of her neck with the hilt of his sword, knocking her unconscious. When the fighting was over, only then did the Chief of Customs Department show his face. He offered to provide a location for interrogation, but Steven turned him down. Staying in Cadus was inconvenient when he had so much to do back home. He sent Bianca and her team to Annapolis on a private jet. The staff grumbled as they cleaned up the hotel. Most of the VIP suites were destroyed like a bomb had exploded inside. They would need renovations before they were open to the public again. "Can you hold a press conference tomorrow and announce their identities?" Steven asked. The chief's heart pounded at being put on the spot. The public humiliation would be a slap to Warhawk's face, and Cadus would fall out with them completely. Even if it didn't get to that point, their relationship was already teetering at the edge. One more push, and their alliance would be over. A mere Chief of Customs Department didn't have the authority to make this important decision. "I apologize, Mr. Adams, but you should discuss this with high-ranking officials. I can't make that decision." "Okay, then I'll have to trouble your king for another meeting." Steven watched the private jet take off for Annapolis. Another one of Warhawk's plans had been foiled, and they would be furious when they found out. If Dr. Dalton removed the chips from Bianca's teammates, he could compare Warhawk's technology advancements with the U.S. Javon's pleasant morning was once again interrupted when Trey and the Leviathan unit members came to the palace as the Sovereign's representatives. Trey relayed Steven's message word for word. "Mr. Adams has a message for you," he said. "I can't tolerate underhanded ambushes. I'd like to publicize last night's attack and warn the rest of the world." Stephen's excuse was righteous and awe-inspiring. Javon had no reason to refuse, but his heart was racing like an ant on a hot pan. "There's no need for Mr. Adams to be so hasty. We haven't interrogated the prisoners yet. We should investigate and verify their identities first." Of course, Stephen had predicted Javon's response. Cadis had a habit of delaying the inevitable. Trey continued. "Mr. Adams also said it's just a press conference. There's no need to be so nervous. Perhaps I should announce Warhawk's crimes in another way. My warships are patrolling the coastal waters, are never too far away." Javon cowered from the blatant threat. He hesitated for 1 second before calling his subordinates to arrange the press conference. Stephen was in a good mood as he headed back to Annapolis, but Warhawk's parliament was in an uproar. After hours of continuous meetings with no resolution, they dispersed, but the leader of the different departments remained. The head senator, Merrill, and the head secretary, Hilskin, shifted the problem to the people left behind. They were wiped out before they had a chance to get close to their target. This is simply a disgrace. Our reputation has been declining ever since we lost at the northern border. Don't you have any ideas? The officers present voiced their opinions. They were from various departments of the military, and their suggestion was to start a war. However, Warhawk wasn't guaranteed victory. The U.S. was stronger than them. Everyone besides the officers thought this was a stupid idea. "The press conference has already begun," Merrill said. "They've taken the initiative, which means they have the advantage. We're at fault. War is not the answer." Hilskin was in agreement. "Our country sets aside a large amount of funds for the military every year. Maybe it'll be better to use that money to invest in other projects, instead of wasting it on idiots like you." The officers fell silent. After a moment, one of them spoke up and made a different suggestion. "Let's station our warships in Cadis's waters and prevent their merchant ships from entering the international trade. The U.S. used this method before, and they were successful. This will cut down half of their market." Merrill, Hilskin, and the others thought it was as good of an idea as any. The important thing was to take an active approach rather than a passive one. With a steady flow of funds, construction of the arena on Mirage Island was close to completion. Stephen could barely recognize it from its original framework. "It's been a while since we announced the competition," Salim said. "Should we open Mirage Island to the public and let the participants enter ahead of time?" "What are the benefits?" Stephen asked. "Once they start gathering on the island, they'll try to find as much information as they can on the sacred manual. It'll be chaos." "That's what we want. We'll weaken the hostile forces by having them take each other out and leaving only the strongest behind. Everyone is participating for the ancient text. They won't care if we implement a fee for early access. They'll want to scope out the area before the competition begins, for a higher chance of winning." Stephen didn't agree right away. He turned back to his computer and inspected the research institute on the island. Most of the areas were closed, and reinforced concrete had been used to fill in the entrances and exits. "Are you planning to destroy the entire institute? If you cover the passageways with concrete, how are we going to use it again in the future?" "We're not. According to the data we've received on the participants, the competition will probably destroy the institute," Salim explained. "It'll be hard to preserve one building, but the overall profits from the competition will make up for it. We can build dozens of research institutes just like the one on the island." Stephen sighed. He'd agreed to Salim's suggestion to build the arena on the island, so he had to accept the consequences. The world grew restless as the day of the competition approached. An endless stream of cruise ships sailed towards the eastern port. Of the participants, the Hidden Cloud Temple, Spectre Cemetery, Bloodfiend Valley, and Peach Blossom Moor had the closest relationship with Stephen. They were treated as distinguished guests and were of the first to set foot on Mirage Island. The next to arrive were a group of martial artists from the island state and a mercenary group from Warhawk. Their organizations were low profile, and there was virtually no information on them. But according to the reception staff on the island, their auras were powerful. The extravagant hotels on the island were put into use. The participants were given luxurious and comfortable accommodations before the competition. As the host, Stephen was there to welcome the participants with his team. The elders went up to Stephen with a smile when they spotted him. Mr. Adams, how have you been? We've never attended a lively event like this before. It's all thanks to your mysterious ancient factions. Everyone's interested in meeting your martial artists. The elders chuckled. You don't need to be modest around us. With the sacred manual as the prize, who can resist participating? The elders had helped Stephen a lot, and he didn't want to lie to them. Please follow me. I'll show you the prize. How much you gain will depend on your luck. He led the elders to an inconspicuous warehouse. There was nothing inside, but the real mystery lay beneath their feet. The Leviathan unit members who accompanied them activated the button to open the gate. The floorboards parted, revealing a hidden staircase to the depths. The elders peered over the edge. It was as deep as a bottomless pit. There was a glass case at the bottom, illuminated by dim lighting. Is that really a fragment of the sacred manual? One of the elders asked. Stephen nodded. Zane had found the fragment while he was sorting through all the treasures Tristan had stolen during his lifetime. They'd both confirmed that it was the real deal. I have to warn you, if your cultivation doesn't meet the requirements, you'll suffer a backlash. The elders didn't think too much of his warning. A fragment of the sacred manual was one glance away. They couldn't give up now. The four of them fixed their gazes on the glass case and zeroed in on the fragment. A blinding light erupted in their minds, silent but deadly, like the explosion of a star. The four elders were influential figures in their respective factions. They weren't expecting to experience a setback here of all places. They scurried back from the edge and consumed a medicinal pill to regulate their inner energy. They sat down and entered a meditative state to recover from the backlash. One of them saw strange symbols, another saw crooked letters, while the other two only saw a white light. That was just a fragment, and we couldn't read a single word. It's a record of the laws of the heavens. It has to be gradually understood during the process of cultivation. Trying to read the sacred manual is the same as prying into the secrets of the heavens. That's why there's a backlash. While the elders were discussing their experiences, realization dawned on them. Those who reached the higher realms would have understood the contents of the sacred manual without needing to read it. Those of a lower realm weren't allowed to read the contents simply because they didn't meet the requirements. The sacred manual was the epitome of contradiction. The prize is real, Stephen said. It's up to you whether you want to continue with the competition or not. Some of the elders left the warehouse, while the others refused to give up. The elder from Peach Blossom Moor made an even more excessive request. Can I go down and see the fragment up close? I'll take responsibility for the consequences. Stephen shook his head. He snapped his fingers, and a small flame flickered to life, lighting up the black hole below. A monstrous octopus was clinging to the walls. The elder's brows furrowed. He hadn't sensed that creature's presence at all. It didn't give off any aura. It's dangerous down there, Stephen warned. I couldn't leave a fragment of the sacred manual unattended. That's true. I'm impressed. You have a lot of interesting things and people around you. The genetically modified octopus was unexpectedly useful in scaring people away. Even the elders, who were at the immortal realm, were astounded. The octopus was capable of releasing a lethal toxin. If they weren't careful, they might lose their life. The day went on after the elders headed back to their rooms at the hotel. Some of the guests received the sovereign's warm hospitality, while others sat on cold chairs, waiting for a reception that never came. And then there were those who were monitored in secret. Several members of the Tribulation sect had sneaked their way onto the island as participants. To ensure their success, Augustus had sent 4. He'd also stationed his bodyguard, the Oracle, and a few of his subordinates in Annapolis. The two teams had split up as a countermeasure against the Sovereign. If anything happened to the team on the island, they would threaten to start a massacre in Annapolis. The 4 cardinals, Diana, Miles, Percy, and Pedro, were gathered at the luxurious hotel suite with serious expressions on their faces. The Sovereign let our team in so easily. Why would he do that? Who knows, but he did announce the martial arts competition, so he has to open the door for all participants. Our Tribulation sect is stronger than anyone else here. Isn't the prize practically ours? A proud soldier is bound to lose. The teams who are lacking in strength have unique techniques to make up for it. Keep your eyes peeled. As they discussed, the topic of conversation shifted to the prize itself. None of them had ever seen the sacred manual, or even a fragment of it. If the sovereign was aiming to fool them with a fake manual, he would succeed. Diana wasn't one to wait around. She wanted to confirm the details before the competition. "I'm going to search the island tonight and find the location of the prize." The cardinals tried to dissuade her. "There's so many martial artists here. They can't hide it for long. Be patient." They were right, but Diana was adamant. Staying at the hotel all day long was no different from house arrest. Surveillance cameras had been installed everywhere except the rooms. It was clear that the sovereign was gathering information on the contestants. Diana was going to search the island whether the cardinals supported her or not, so they gave her a word of advice. "Mirage Island isn't that far from Annapolis. Maybe the sovereign hasn't transported the prize to the island yet. It'll be a hit or miss." As the sun set and night fell, the island was as lively as the big city. Bonfire parties, performances, shopping stalls, and more. There were security guards on patrol 24/7. Martial artists weren't like regular people who needed a certain amount of sleep to function. Their bodies were strong and full of energy. Eventually, they would need to find some form of entertainment. Diana took a small team from Tribulation Sect members and changed into ordinary outfits before leaving the hotel in a hurry. "Miss Diana, we don't have a map of the island. It's too big for us to search in one night. Where are we going first?" "Important places have the most guards and the tightest security. We'll start from there." Stephen was staying at the white office building next to the Research Institute with his team. It was equipped with livable facilities, and it was the command center for the competition. His subordinate reported that Diana and a few members of their group were heading this way. The Tribulation Sect never did anything without a goal in mind. Taking a stroll under the moonlight was unlikely. They were probably searching for the sacred manual. Stephen decided to follow them in secret. He disguised himself and headed out with Trey and a small group of Leviathan Unit members. Diana and her team's first target was a white building on the other side of the island. They circled the premises and concluded that it would be difficult to sneak in. There were too many guards and people walking around. As Diana was thinking about what to do next, she felt a chill down her spine. She looked behind her, but there was no one there. The darkness of the forest stared back at her. "Someone's watching us." Her team stopped walking and scanned the area. There was nothing out of the ordinary. "Let's check out the forest," Diana said. Her team volunteered to investigate in her stead. "We'll go in first. This could be a trap. If we can't deal with issues as minor as this, don't expect to come out on top during the competition. Kill them off quietly. Think of this as a warm-up for the real thing." Like the other cardinals, Diana never took her enemies seriously. In their eyes, the Tribulation Sect was the strongest ancient martial arts faction out there, and nothing could be more powerful than their talismans. Stephen was a little surprised to see their group casually walking into the forest. A martial artist with profound cultivation and a one-track mind was nothing more than a contradiction. When Diana entered the forest with her team, knives shot out from the darkness. She waved her hand, and the talismans blocked the attack, sending the knives clattering to the ground. The Leviathan Unit members dressed in black emerged from behind the trees and launched a collective attack. Their swords were lethal and left no room for maneuver. Every strike targeted Diana's vitals. Diana stood in place, lifting a hand. The talismans hovering around her melted into a liquid form. They attached themselves to the Leviathan Unit's swords, increasing their weight by 100-fold. Their weapons were useless, so the Leviathan Unit resorted to punches and kicks. Diana and her team met them head-on. Stephen and Trey were watching from a distance. The talismans had the ability to change from a solid form to a liquid form. This was an advanced form of technology they'd never seen before. During the battle with Sermiel, he'd used his talismans to condense iron sand and change its shape. It followed a similar principle to what Diana was doing now. Diana and her team were stronger than Stephen had expected. Others would notice if the fight escalated. He extracted a wisp of flame from the Killen's core and sent it in Diana's direction. The small flame was erratic, and it was bright as a firefly. It was tiny, but its destructive force was contained to a point at its center. When it touched the talismans, the fire expanded and enveloped Diana. She staggered back, brushing the flames from her clothes. She signaled for her team to retreat, and after throwing one last glance at the darkness of the forest, she followed them out. Diana was confident, but she wasn't stupid. If she wasn't sure she could defeat her enemy, then she would wait. The night passed without further commotion. Early the next morning, Stephen's subordinate informed him that Zorvis, one of the owners of Silver Shield Corporation, had arrived on the island. Stephen straightened his clothes and hurried to the hotel to welcome him. Zorvis kept his affiliation with the Nine States Financial Group well hidden by having his manager take charge of daily operations. Neither Stephen nor the Leviathan unit were aware of his identity. "It's an honor to meet you in person, Mr. Adams." Stephen patted Zorvis's shoulder like they were old friends. "Why so polite? We're close business partners." Their grudges from the past had been written off. Who could go against billions of sponsorship fees? The only reason they completed the competition venue so quickly was because of Zorvis's investment. Stephen led him to a private room where a table of delicacies had been prepared. It was bright and early in the morning, but Stephen was overly enthusiastic. "We've dealt with Silver Shield Corporation's mess. If you'd like to continue investing in the U.S., you could consider rebranding your company for a fresh start." "That's a good idea," Zorvis said, relieved by the Sovereign's friendly attitude. "I'll decide after the competition." Tina and Cade were awaiting their trial, and no one knew what their sentence would be. It didn't seem like Zorvis or the other owners cared about the verdict, so Stephen left it at that. The two of them chatted over a delicious meal and a round of drinks. Towards the end of the meeting, Zorvis made a request. "I didn't come here because I'm a sponsor. I'm interested in participating in the competition." "Is that so?" Stephen looked out the window at the garden in front of the hotel. Warhawk's mercenary group was sitting at the table, eating and chatting. It turned out they were a part of Zorvis's team. Stephen's aura swept past them. The mercenaries weren't particularly skilled in martial arts, and they were vastly different from the Tribulation Sect members he'd seen last night. It was likely that they'd undergone genetic modification. When they weren't in combat, they didn't emit any aura. "I was hoping to challenge my subordinates," Zorvis explained. "Whether we win or not, we'll have to see." "Good luck," Stephen said. "Think of my competition as a short vacation. If there's anything you need, don't hesitate to let me know." As time passed, the island bustled with martial artists from around the world. The environment was too noisy for Stephen's taste, so he went back to Annapolis. Paperwork was piling up at the military's administration department, waiting for Stephen to review them. At the top of the pile was a written verdict without a seal. The administrative secretary gave Stephen a summary of the documents when he came back from the island. "Harry and Rebecca's investigation is concluded. They will be sentenced to 50 years in prison." Although Harry and Rebecca's crimes were severe, they were the Sovereign's family, and he had to approve the verdict before it was announced. "Is this the final decision of the judges based on the evidence and the law?" "Yes, they treated the case like any other," the secretary replied. He was careful with his words. This case was tiring because of the people involved, and he couldn't wait to get it over with. Stephen didn't care about Harry and Rebecca. If it were up to him, he would just execute them. They had committed treason and threatened Kim's life on multiple occasions in the past. Their crimes were serious and punishable by death. But at the end of the day, Harry and Rebecca were Kim's family, and she wouldn't want anyone from her family to be killed. Stephen reviewed the verdict and stamped his seal of approval. Harry and Rebecca would be sentenced to 50 years at the Seven Stars prison. The only reason the judges exempted them from execution was because detaining them in a prison built for dangerous martial artists made up for it. It was equivalent to a life sentence, and it was the same as waiting for death. 2 hours later, Harry and Rebecca's long-awaited names appeared on the official bulletin board of the local police station. The verdict shocked many people, especially DeAndre and Ron. They looked like they aged 20 years from stress and devastation. The Cassidy family lost their successors. DeAndre couldn't give up like this. "Can't we rescue them?" "Are you crazy?" Ron demanded. "Do you know how heavily guarded that prison is? We'll be killed before we even get close." DeAndre refused to give in. Harry and Rebecca had gone overboard, but they were still members of his family. They were the only ones who could continue the family's legacy. "The prisoners broke out of their cells before. There has to be a way." Ron was in disbelief. He tried to persuade DeAndre to change his mind, but he wouldn't listen. DeAndre sent his subordinates to collect information about the riot at the Seven Stars prison. If they could just find the person responsible for the riots, there was hope in rescuing Harry and Rebecca. "I'll transfer my assets to your name later. Keep this to yourself." "It's not going to be easy," Ron protested. "How do you think Stephen will react when he finds out? He'll wipe out the Cassidy family, me included. This is a crazy plan." "Just do as I say for now." The projects in Cadiz had been progressing smoothly, and Kim didn't need to be there to supervise anymore. She boarded a plane to Annapolis without telling Stephen, so she could surprise him when she got back. Kim had just found Stephen standing in front of his office at the military administration building, talking to his subordinate, when she heard about Harry and Rebecca's verdict. He noticed her at the end of the hallway and dismissed his subordinate before walking up to her with a bright smile. "Why didn't you tell me you were coming back today? I would have picked you up at the airport. Are you done with work in Cadiz?" "I wanted to surprise you. Cadiz's officials are supportive of the projects, so I don't need to be there. They'll be completed in no time." "That means you're free, right? Want to come with me to Mirage Island? The competition is about to start." Stephen was in high spirits, and Kim was happy to see him. But a small part of her was conflicted. She wasn't fond of Harry and Rebecca, but DeAndre cared about them. It felt like she was caught in the middle. On one hand, the grandfather she loved had lost 2 of his grandchildren, but on the other, the man she loved represented the law. If Stephen noticed what she was thinking, he didn't comment. "Let's go out for lunch?" Kim nodded, and they walked to the elevator in silence. As they waited, she looked around at the pristine government building. They were standing side by side, but in this place, there was a distance between them she would never be able to close. Here, he was the sovereign, a leader bearing the burden of his country, while she was a civilian. Here, he lived another life she knew nothing about. The elevator dinged, and the doors opened. They stepped inside, and Stephen pressed the button for the lobby. Kim glanced at him, only to find he was looking at her, too. She reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers. During the past few years, she'd come to realize that family was ever-changing. Here, Stephen was the sovereign, and they were worlds apart. But he was also her husband, and she was his wife. That was one thing that would never change. Kim squeezed his hand, and he squeezed back. No words were necessary. Whatever happened to the Cassidy family was none of their business. Threatening a military official was a crime, let alone the sovereign. But Stephen had always taken Harry and Rebecca's threats in stride and considered it an internal family conflict. Harry and Rebecca should have stopped there, but they didn't, and they got what was coming to them. Kim and Stephen's lunch plans were ruined when they ran into DeAndre at the entrance. He greeted Stephen politely and asked if he could meet Harry and Rebecca. "Of course you can. That's in line with the regulations. Let's go visit them together." The 3 of them headed to the Seven Stars prison in Stephen's car. "Thank you for letting me visit them, Mr. Adams," DeAndre said. "It's formal procedure. You don't have to thank me." DeAndre's expression was gentle as he continued the conversation in an amiable tone. "It's for the best. Those 2 can slowly reflect on their actions in prison." Stephen glanced at him in the rearview mirror, not knowing if he meant it. They were silent for the rest of their journey. After Elias destroyed the core of the array and released the prisoners, the Seven Stars prison had undergone a complete transformation. The array had been repaired, and the internal structure of the building had been upgraded. After the guard confirmed their identities, he activated the gate. A series of metal gears turned, and the alloy gate that weighed over 100 tons lifted and revealed the interior. The prison had been constructed on a mountain, and its defenses were world-class. It would remain standing even if the exterior was hit with an explosive projectile. Stephen held Kim's hand and led her inside. DeAndre followed behind them. Past the gate was a spacious hall dimly lit with fluorescent lights. The staff took them down the winding path to the elevator. "This building is complicated," Kim whispered. Yeah, it's like an isolated underground city, Stephen said. There are living facilities at the perimeter for the staff. Even if the mountain collapses, there's enough supplies to last 3 or 5 years. If the prisoners break out, the explosives will activate to trap them underground. That gives the guards and reinforcement time to get here to contain the situation. DeAndre listened quietly. They had taken so many twists and turns he'd lost track of the route. The complexity of the prison was beyond him. The elevator was encased in a metal container. It descended for around 5 to 6 minutes before finally arriving at the designated floor. The cells in this area were divided by steel fences lined with protruding barbs. Harry and Rebecca were inside, wearing a prisoner's uniform and no longer as arrogant and domineering as before. Tears pricked DeAndre's eyes at the sight of his grandchildren behind bars. Take good care of yourselves. Follow the rules. Don't cause trouble. Rebecca forced a smile. Don't cry, Grandpa. It's not that bad in here. There's free food and accommodations. Don't worry about us, Harry said, also doing his best to smile. Harry and Rebecca knew what 50 years in prison meant. Their lives were practically over, but they couldn't show any sign of weakness in front of Stephen. They had to retain whatever little dignity they had left. Stephen had already walked away to give them privacy and check on the other facilities. Rebecca's gaze shifted to Kim. What are you doing here? We don't need your pity. I came with Grandpa, Kim retorted. I'm not here to see you two make fools of yourselves, if that's what you're thinking. Then take him home, Harry said. We don't have anything else to say. DeAndre had already composed himself. Before he ran into Kim and Stephen in front of the military administration building, he'd sent Kim a message, telling her about Harry and Rebecca's sentence and asking if she could persuade Stephen to let him meet them. Her reply came seconds later. It was short and straight to the point. If he had something to say, then he should ask Stephen directly. She also asked him to stop using her as a messenger for their family's affairs. DeAndre couldn't count on Kim, so he could only rely on himself. The gears in his brain were turning, trying to find a flaw in the prison, but there was none. The most he could do was take out his phone and record the location and steps on the way out. The staff took Stephen to the core of the array. It was contained in a massive statue of a dragon bound by chains. 7 lanterns in the shape of a crane hung from the ceiling on both sides. Incense burners were placed around the room, releasing wisps of smoke. Stephen placed his hand on the statue and sensed a raging power inside. This wasn't a regular statue. It felt like there was a small world within that was isolated from the outside. How is this array different from the previous one? The boss said it's 100 times stronger, the staff answered. If it's destroyed, this entire underground space will turn to dust. The Leviathan unit's leader knew what he was doing, so Stephen trusted his judgment. He asked the staff about Harry and Rebecca's condition. Apparently, they were distraught when they first were brought here, but now they were calmer and more adjusted. The other prisoners are dangerous martial artists. Keep an eye on Harry and Rebecca and protect them. Understood, Mr. Adams. They're both in solitary confinement, so it's unlikely they'll come in contact with the other prisoners. After an initial discussion, Warhawk's Parliament came to the conclusion that the U.S. was overstepping their boundaries by interfering with the incident in Cadiz. Bianca and her team had fallen into the United States' hands, and they had to get them back. Hillskin sent one of the higher-ups, Sawyer, to the U.S. to negotiate their freedom. This was the same higher-up who'd accompanied him to Verglas Strait for Amber and Mitty's auction. When their plane landed in Annapolis, Sawyer and the delegation team checked into a hotel and aggressively ordered the staff to call the Sovereign over. The staff quickly reported the situation to Stephen. He arranged a meeting in less than an hour, and tense negotiations ensued. Kidnapping regular tourists? Stephen asked incredulously. I believe you know what happened better than anyone. Every country has citizens scattered around the world. It's not unusual for our people to have been in Cadiz and resolved a crisis they happened to encounter. I don't know what you're talking about, Sawyer fired back. You're making false accusations to cover up the fact that you kidnapped Warhawk's citizens to interrogate them. I advise you to release them immediately, or there will be consequences. Stephen leaned back on the couch and turned a deaf ear to Sawyer's threats. After arguing for half a day, the staff didn't bring Sawyer even one glass of water. He finally quieted down when his voice turned hoarse. "Wrap up your nonsense and go home," Stephen said. "We don't have extra funds to provide for your trip." The delegation team accompanying Sawyer interjected in a friendlier tone. "Mr. Adams, please calm down. We're a little anxious, but we don't have any ill intentions towards your country. There must be some misunderstanding. We are willing to pay their bail and interrogate them ourselves." The Leviathan unit had already interrogated Bianca and her team. Dr. Dalton had also removed the chips from the prisoners. They'd served their uses, and leaving them in the country was a waste of space. "Our country's regulations regarding bail are strict, and the amount is high. $50 million for each person. We'll release them after we receive payment." The delegation team was floored. What was the difference between this and extortion? The only person with any value was Bianca. Everyone else was a genetically modified prisoner. No one would care if they ended up dead in a ditch somewhere. If they agreed to Stephen's deal, they'd be forking over hundreds of millions for no reason. Sawyer opened his mouth to bargain, but Stephen interrupted him and firmly stated that there was no room for negotiations. It was all or nothing. He had no choice but to transfer the money. The procedures were carried out fairly quickly. The delegation team and Bianca's team were reunited in less than an hour. The humiliation of failing the mission was more difficult for Bianca to accept than the injuries she'd sustained. "Mr. Sawyer, please give us a chance to make up for our mistakes. We'd like to participate in the martial arts competition on Mirage Island. We don't care about the rankings or the prize. We'll kill as many people from the U.S. as possible." The prisoners stood beside Bianca. If they went back to Warhawk after their crushing defeat, they would be thrown in prison for the rest of their lives. Sawyer deeply doubted their capabilities. "The participants are some of the strongest martial artists in the world. Did you forget you failed a simple mission in Cadis?" "All participants are welcome," Bianca urged. "We might as well improve Warhawk's chances." They were determined, so Sawyer could only agree to their request. They signed up for the competition and sailed to the island. Stephen double-checked the money in the account before bringing Kim to Mirage Island. The arena was complete, and security measures were in place. Salim went to Stephen's room at the office building to discuss the next step. "Has the Tribulation sect made another move?" Stephen asked. "No, they've been staying at the hotel like everyone else. They come out occasionally for a brief stroll." "Seems like they've learned their lesson from the other night. Okay, let's start the competition." Salim turned on the projector. A jungle from various angles came into view. It spanned approximately 20% of the island. The flowers, plants, and trees were different from those found in the wild. The vegetation is highly toxic, and the beasts are aggressive. Dr. Dalton implanted AI chips into the plants and the beast as an experiment back when he was there. This first round will take place here. I'll eliminate the weaker contestants, and the rest will fight in the arena. Stephen was on good terms with the ancient martial arts factions, and he was reluctant to let them participate in a dangerous elimination round. "Is there an antidote if the participants are poisoned?" "Yes, Dr. Dalton developed an antidote before he moved his research to Annapolis. We are monitoring the ancient factions, and we've also sent one to our people to the jungle to look out for them and keep an eye on the general situation." Stephen gave Salim a questioning look. "Who?" "I don't think you've met him yet. His name is Liam Pierre, and he's the student of the Leviathan unit's leader." An hour into the competition, Cardinal Pedro caught a stench in the air. Leftover meat in the mouths of carnivores after they ate was a breeding ground for bacteria, and the odor was easy to detect. Just as the Tribulation sect members turned around, planning to deal with an ordinary wild animal, a massive wolf pounced on them. They attacked with their swords, but its fur deflected their blows. The wolf latched onto their limbs, tearing flesh and spraying blood. The 4 cardinals were disappointed in their team. "You good-for-nothings! You can't even deal with one beast? Move aside." One cardinal tossed out his talisman. When it touched the wolf's fur, the energy seeped inside its body, and it burst from the inside out. Stephen watched the battle displayed on the projector. The cardinal who'd killed the wolf was at the later stages of the immortal realm. It made sense that killing one beast was a piece of cake for him. As night went on, Steven switched back and forth between the monitors, but there weren't any more battles. The participants didn't know how long they would have to stay in the jungle, and they'd only brought the bare minimum supplies with them. Exploring unknown territory in the dark was dangerous, so most participants spent the night hunting for food and finding a place to stay until dawn broke. While most of the participants were keeping a low profile until morning, Steven watched as a young man boldly crossed the jungle with no concern for the risks. According to Salim, this man was Liam Pierre. He wore a special watch that synchronized with the chips implanted in the beasts and plants. They recognized him as one of their own and would protect him with their life. The primitive jungle became Liam's territory. He spotted a raging bonfire a few hundred feet away as the aroma of barbecued meat drifted over. Bianca and her team were sitting around the fire. Liam hid in the bushes and approached them slowly. Bianca and her team weren't as keen as the other participants. He sent a sharp wave of inner energy into the flames. The flyaway sparks surprised the prisoners, and before they could react, another wave of energy cut into them, so deep that their limbs were almost severed. Bianca gripped her dagger and lifted a boulder with her other hand, tossing it in Liam's direction. It crashed into the ground, kicking up a cloud of dust. Liam didn't show himself. He moved along the perimeter of the clearing, using the trees and vegetation to hide himself. Bianca and her team couldn't lock onto his position because the leaves and flowers rustled all around them. "Stop hiding like a coward. Come out and fight me fair and square." Her question was answered by another rustle of leaves. "Let's go over there and drag him out," one of the prisoners said. "Whoever it is doesn't have backup. We have the advantage in numbers." Bianca shook her head. "We can't leave our injured team members alone. That could be his plan." She thought the enemy was sounding them out with a couple of attacks and would leave once they realized the team wouldn't be budging from the bonfire. Little did she know that Liam was here to test his new technique against people who tried to harm Steven's wife. He'd launched another attack while Bianca's team was whispering. His inner energy condensed into a phantom of a snake with the earth attribute. It slithered across the clearing and coiled around the wounded prisoners. Bianca's team slashed at the snake with their weapons, but only managed to leave a few scratches behind. The layer of sand and dirt on the ground healed the snake's wounds almost instantly. Before Bianca's team could attack again, the wounded prisoners breathed their last, and the snake disappeared. Liam was satisfied with his new technique and left. As the first light of day broke through the crowds, he used the watch to analyze the plants and fruits on trees for any poison. The audience's reaction at the hotel varied from disappointment to excitement. Sawyer and his delegation team had brought Bianca and her team to the island, and they sighed when they suffered casualties. "The enemy was nowhere to be seen during the entire attack," Sawyer complained. "Bianca's leadership is practically useless." "Why didn't they recover?" someone from the delegation team asked. "Their wounds were serious, but not to the point of no recovery." "That snake pushed gravel and sand into their bodies when it coiled around them and used it to destroy their internal organs," Sawyer explained. "When an organ is destroyed, the healing process is extended. They died because their body couldn't keep up with the damage." Warhawk's biochemical technology had improved, but it wasn't perfect. There were flaws, and this battle was proof. Sawyer lost interest in Bianca's team. They were side characters compared to the elite martial artists around them. When Bianca's team was wiped out, the other guests might start pointing fingers at their delegation team and mock them. In the evening, Steven changed into a black uniform and put on a mask to hide his face. Thrilling battles were far and few in between. Most of the participants were playing a game of hunter and prey. They hid in the dark and waited for the right time to launch a sneak attack. At this rate, it would take forever for the first round to end. The Leviathan unit members drove a worn-out silver van on an inconspicuous path to the other side of the jungle to sneak Steven in. "Be careful, Mr. Adams. If anything unexpected happens, retreat as soon as you can." "It'll be fine," Steven said. "Liam's martial arts are pretty good. We can handle it." He dashed into the jungle with no hesitation. The Leviathan unit had provided him with the same watch Liam was wearing. Both of them had activated the location feature, making it convenient to search for the other party. Liam was sharpening his weapons when Stephen found him. They were dressed in the same uniform and wearing the same mask. They looked identical under the moonlight. "Who's our first target?" Liam asked. "Warhawk's mercenary group. They're working for Zorvis." Liam was confused. Zorvis was the competition's #1 sponsor. Why would they attack their team? He couldn't figure out the reason, but he didn't ask questions. He quietly followed Stephen to the mercenaries' camp. Tensions were high between Warhawk and the U.S., and Stephen wasn't expecting Warhawk to send a mercenary group of skilled martial artists to the competition with Zorvis at the helm. As they approached the mercenaries, Liam ran ahead of Stephen. "Wait, they have a lot of people. I'll test their strength first." Liam's main priority was to ensure Stephen's safety and eliminate the enemy. The two of them were still some distance away from the mercenary group, but the captain sensed their presence. He flicked his sword in their direction, sending a blade of inner energy through the trees. Liam had no time to dodge. He deflected the wave with his sword, revealing his location. "Hey, there's someone who delivered himself right to our doorstep. Kill him." Under the captain's lead, the mercenaries charged at Liam in formation. The chips implanted in their brains coordinated their movements by analyzing the visual information sent to the brain. Stephen hid in the forest and watched from a distance. The Leviathan unit had given him a small device to control the AI chips inside the vegetation. Green vines shot out of the bushes and swept towards the mercenaries. Their swords were sharp, but the vines were endless. They were gradually pushed back. The captain signaled for his team to step back. "Are you controlling these strange plants? That's cheating." Liam grinned. "Cheating? That's not up for you to decide. If you want to live, then get out of here. In case you haven't noticed, there's only one of you. Then let's have a one-on-one." Liam and the captain lunged for each other, while the other mercenaries chopped down the vines. This time, the growth of the vines couldn't keep up with their swords. Stephen noticed something strange about their weapons. They contained some kind of energy storage device. Currents of electricity ran down the length of the blade. There was no rule that forbade the participants from modifying their weapons, so this was to be expected. Liam also noticed that the mercenaries weren't wielding typical swords. Every time their weapons clashed, his arm went numb, his breathing hitched, and his inner energy was thrown into temporary disarray. "Your choice of weapon is interesting." The captain smirked. "Are you curious? If you let me strike you once, you'll understand the mechanics behind it. I promise it won't hurt." Liam didn't answer. He increased his speed and launched a more aggressive counterattack. He manifested miniature black wooden totems with strange patterns engraved on the surface. They hovered around him, floating aimlessly. The mercenaries nearby struck the totems with their swords. A shower of sawdust spewed into the air, just like an ordinary wooden totem. What is he doing with that rotten wood? Is he building a coffin for himself? There's something wrong with his brain. Send him on his way. The mercenaries attacked Liam together. He stood in place, making no move to dodge. Their swords pierced his chest, while his blade tore open their chests. 3 mercenaries dropped to the ground. Their flesh was torn, and their ribs were shattered, exposing their beating hearts. Before their regeneration could kick in, Liam's residual energy crushed their hearts. The captain and his remaining mercenaries were stunned by the mutual destruction. They glanced at Liam, who was lying on the ground. He had been impaled by 3 swords straight through his chest. Just when they were certain of his death, he stirred and pulled the swords out of his body. There was no blood or any sign of injury. The only evidence of what had happened was his torn uniform. Half of Liam's wooden totems shattered into a cloud of dust. When he was impaled, he transferred the damage onto the totems as wooden substitutes. The captain and his team realized that those strange totems had nullified the damage. They targeted the totems with their swords, but they were like wildfire that couldn't be extinguished. Liam could manifest them over and over as long as his inner energy was sufficient. Stephen was also surprised by Liam's technique. He'd never seen anything like it. For a second, even he thought Liam was gravely injured. Stephen condensed his inner energy into a dragon of fire with the illusory pearls in its mouth. The 7 gems glowed, and a stream of fire released from the dragon's mouth. Flames enveloped the mercenaries, and they collapsed in a heap as their swords melted from the heat. Their skin was charred, but their healing ability kept them alive. They staggered to their feet and ran off with their captain's order. They fled in every direction. Liam didn't know who to chase, so he stayed put. Stephen emerged from the forest and counted the bodies on the ground. Good work. This should be enough to scare Zorvas's team. Should we chase them down? Liam asked. No, we shouldn't kill them too fast. We're just here to decrease their numbers and speed things up. Their watches sported a high-definition LCD screen. Stephen connected to the drone's camera to find the other teams. It was evening, and many participants had put out their bonfires to hide for the night. They hid in caves, treetops, and forests. Some of them camouflaged themselves among the weeds. It was dark, and the cameras couldn't lock on to their locations. Do you want to head back? I can track them down for you, Liam volunteered. It's okay, it's still early. Let's keep going. Stephen decided on a river for their next destination. Water was important for survival, even for the strongest of martial artists. He and Liam reached out with their auras to sweep the vicinity for martial artists. No one followed them. They headed to the river and arrived in less than half an hour. The riverbank was littered with blood and mangled bodies. Their torsos were cut open, and their insides were spilling out. Judging from their attire, a conflict between different factions took place not too long before they were interrupted by someone or something else. Stephen used the radar feature on his watch and scanned the area for wild beasts. Nothing showed up within a 3-mile radius. The river rippled and bubbles floated to the surface. Before they could process what was happening, a group of martial artists clad in black leaped out of the water and lunged for them. Based on the designs of their blades, they were from the island state. They must have been responsible for the bodies lying on the riverbank. Cherry blossom petals fell from the sky with every swing of their blades. Liam leaped into action. A massive phantom of a snake burst through the ground, halting the martial artists' attacks. You two look identical, but you don't have the same auras. Oh, I get it. One of you is a body double, am I right? If you want the answer, then come and see for yourself, Stephen provoked. You asked for it. The leader of the group flicked his blade. It extended and bent at an angle as the snake approached. When the snake coiled around the blade, it sliced through its scales and shattered the manifestation. Liam rushed at the martial artists with his sword in hand, while Stephen stepped back to control the vegetation with the device. The ground rumbled, and towering flowers burst through the cracks. The petals unfurled, exposing its gaping mouth with razor-sharp teeth. A corrosive liquid spilled down the stem, emitting a pungent smell. The martial artist from the island state thought Stephen was using some kind of strange technique to control the plants. The flowers were enormous, but all plants had roots. That had to be their weakness. They targeted the bottom of the stems to cut off their connection to the roots, but before they got close, the flowers swooped down and swept to the ground. One martial artist who couldn't get away in time was entangled in their stems. He hacked at the petals, leaving behind a shallow scratch. The corrosive liquid sprayed from the petals, cracking the blade and dissolving the martial artist. He became nutrients for the flower to absorb. After tasting the sweetness of one human, the man-eating flowers began to target the other martial artists. They tried to run, but they were already trapped by the sea of flowers. The corrosive liquid rendered their blades useless. Stephen was impressed by Salim's traps. Having the first round take place in the jungle was an ingenious idea. Salim had planted seeds with AI chips throughout the jungle. When they were activated, the chip would catalyze their growth, making it easier to take down the hostile factions. The leader couldn't let his team be wiped out in the first round. He tore off his sleeve. His arm was covered in bandages. He unwrapped the gauze layer by layer, revealing bloody eyeballs protruding from his skin. When Stephen and Liam made eye contact, their surroundings blurred, and the world began to spin. Stephen shook his head, trying to regain his bearings. Liam, look away! Those eyes distort our inner energy! He activated the device, and the flowers bent down, forming a curtain to separate them from the leader. The eyeballs released a torrent of black fire. It ignited the corrosive liquid, and the sea of flowers went up in flames. Liam pierced the ground with the tip of his sword. A cloud of dust erupted, covering the sky and blocking out the sun. He and Stephen ran into the forest while the dust obscured the group's vision. Higher cultivation was insignificant against the unknown. Strength wasn't everything. There was always someone more skilled in a different way. Stephen and Liam stopped running when they reached the halfway point of the jungle. Liam noticed that Stephen was in a bad mood. "There's a few hours left before dawn. If there's someone you want to get rid of, you can let me know. I haven't used my full strength yet. I can take care of them for you." From what Stephen had seen of Liam's martial arts, he had a vast set of unique techniques at his disposal. It made sense, because his teacher was the Leviathan unit's leader. With more experience, Liam would probably enter the upper ranks of the Leviathan unit one day. "No, it's fine. Don't reveal yourself. Hide in the dark and sow discord from a distance. Just let them fight it out." There wasn't much going on tonight, so Stephen slipped out of the jungle through the same location he'd sneaked in and went back to his room. Kim was still awake, watching the competition. She'd switched the monitor to a drone above the river and watched Stephen and Liam's fight with the island state's martial artist from beginning to end. "Do you always fight like that without thinking about your own safety?" Stephen shrugged. "Sometimes. The first team was weak. My friends and I were breezing through the jungle until that group we ran into at the end." Kim let out a sigh. There was nothing she could do about his reckless personality. Just be careful. If this were a normal competition, Stephen would have sent the Leviathan unit into the jungle to decrease the number of hostile factions. But Mirage Island was on lockdown, and the government was restricting transportation to the venue. They were also airing a live broadcast of an abridged version of the actual competition. The U.S. was the host, and if it was revealed that the Leviathan unit was interfering, it would paint the country in a bad light. Moreover, not all of the participants were members of hostile factions plotting to attack the U.S. and steal the sacred manual. Stephen was on good terms with the ancient martial arts factions. They'd accepted the invitation, hoping for a fair competition to win the sacred manual. They were sharp, and he wouldn't be able to hide his interference from them for long. Stephen turned on his laptop to check the latest news. Salim had sent him an email with information on the participants' martial arts using footage from the drones and analysis from a computer. Stephen scrolled through the document until he reached the participants from the island state. They were a hidden group of martial artists who transplanted the eyes of aggressive beasts that had lived for thousands of years onto their bodies. Their unusual technique reminded Stephen of Trey. His prosthetic arm was constructed using a small part of the fire kiln, giving him some of the beast's fire abilities. Kim leaned over to see what he was reading. "Do you think that they're going to win the competition?" "No, I'm going to find a way to make them tone it down a notch." Stephen found rats hiding in the caves near the river. He used the device to lure them out. They rushed through the entrance of the cave in tides, and their horde was so dense that they covered the clearing. The martial artists from the island state had just finished dealing with their dead companions' bodies when a swarm of rats surrounded them. "Where did these rats come from? Their eyes are red, and their teeth are sharper than normal. They're mutants!" They increased their speed to the limit, forcing a way through the horde and fleeing in panic. The rats were even faster. As the seconds passed, the swarm grew in size. When they lashed out with their swords, the rats dodged easily. A simple swing of their weapons was useless. The mutant rats were too dexterous and small to be hit. "We can't keep running like this. Should we find a lake to hide in? Rats are afraid of water." "That won't work. They came from the caves near the riverbank. They're not normal rats." The leader of the group unwrapped his arm, and the eyeballs on his skin released a wave of black flames. It was effective in burning the rats to a crisp, but it drained a lot of his inner energy. He couldn't possibly kill off a whole horde. In a moment of desperation, he sensed the presence of other martial artists nearby. It was perfect timing. Whoever they were would be their scapegoat. The leader led his group in their direction to lure the rats over. Stephen had already seen who their scapegoats were. It was the internal members and elders from the Spectre Cemetery in Bloodfiend Valley. With them joining forces, there was a high chance of them taking down the martial artists from the island state. Stephen had confidence in their abilities, so he stopped the rats from attacking. The internal members had also sensed the presence of other martial artists in the area. The moment the island state's martial artists appeared, they rushed at them aggressively with their swords raised. The leader and his group were forced to engage in combat. They stepped back in surrender after exchanging a few blows. "Wait, we have something important to discuss." The elder from the Spectre Cemetery walked out from the crowd and looked at the leader suspiciously, waiting to see what tricks he was trying to pull. "The rats on this island are mutants," the leader said, jerking a thumb to the ground behind him. "As fellow contestants, we should solve this problem together." The elders and internal members glanced past the leader. Thousands of rats were gathered in a densely packed swarm. Their gleaming red eyes stared back at them. Their unsettling eye contact gave them goosebumps, but the elder from the Spectre Cemetery was cautious. The words of a competitor couldn't be trusted. He kicked a stone in the horde's direction. The rats skittered to the side to avoid the stone, but it only caused a momentary disturbance. The gap was quickly filled, and the horde was reformed. The rats stayed where they were and made no move to attack. The elder turned back to the leader. "Coming here in the middle of the night to talk nonsense means that you have an ulterior motive. Let's cut the tit-chat and have a little spar." Without waiting for their approval, he lifted his hand. His movements were simple, and he didn't take a single step. Before the leader could see through the elder's technique, a shadow appeared behind him, and a powerful force slammed into his back. His group drew their swords and slashed at the shadow. While they were distracted, the ancient martial arts factions took advantage of their numbers and surrounded the group. Stephen watched their fight from the monitor. He was interested in the ancient factions' techniques. Their swords circled in the air in a spiral of wind and lightning before crashing down on the martial artists from the island state. The leader and his group tried to deflect the attacks with their blades, but aside from creating a few metallic sparks, it had no effect. They hadn't made a move yet, but Stephen suspected that they had other techniques. When there was an opportunity, he would have to send someone to the island state to learn their martial arts. It could be useful as a reference. Ever since the U.S. expanded their business to Cadus, the island state had firmly expressed that they were on Warhawk's side. Cadus's market had been occupied, and the import and export trade was controlled. The island state's higher-ups weren't happy about this outcome, so they'd sent out a team to participate in the martial arts competition to obtain a high ranking and show off their strength. The flying swords from the ancient factions covered an area of several hundred square yards. The leader of the island state's martial artist had revealed his trump card early on in the competition, and he was hesitant to show it again. But as the barrage of swords inched closer, he made up his mind and unwrapped the bandages from his arms. He waved his blade, forming a black tornado to counter the swords. He couldn't get rid of them completely, but he managed to push the formation higher. Blood flowed from the eyeballs embedded in his arm. His strength was reaching its limit. The leader's group used their fingers to cut their palms and drew a strange pattern with their blood on the ground. A giant scorpion crawled out of the cracks. Kim, who was watching the competition with Stephen, was startled by its monstrous appearance. "It's bigger than a truck. Is it genetically modified like the rats?" "No, I think they used a summoning technique," Stephen said. The cracks on the ground were emitting a faint glow. He was reminded of the spatial teleportation array of Tristan's tower. A beast summoned from another dimension wouldn't be easy to deal with. Stephen pressed the device to have the rats test out the scorpion first. The swarm, which had been silent for a long time, was suddenly active and rushed towards the scorpion. It flicks its tail, flinging poisonous stingers at the rats. The horde was paralyzed. The elders instructed the internal members to step back. "The rats seem to be helping us. Let's wait to see how this plays out." The ancient factions put some distance between themselves and the scorpion. The island state's martial artists stood on its back like they were driving an armored tank through the forest. The rats couldn't penetrate the scorpion's shell. When they tried to climb up, they were sent tumbling to the ground with a sweep of its tail. The elders from the Spectre Cemetery and Bloodfiend Valley manifested a mist of blood. The droplets condensed into a skeleton. It jumped in front of the scorpion and swung its fists. The violent collision upturned the ground. The rats were too small and had nothing to contribute, so Stephen made them leave the battlefield. After exchanging 20 blows, the scorpion's pincers clamped onto the skeleton's wrist and snapped it. Stephen was concerned about the elders and the internal members. Even the ancient factions were having trouble dealing with the martial artists from the island state. Their sword formation from before couldn't penetrate the scorpion's shell. The skeleton fearlessly charged forward, but it couldn't escape its fate. It was shattered into a pile of bones. The two elders rushed over with their swords in hand, aiming for the scorpion's eyes and mouth. Its tail shot out numerous poisoned stingers, enough to blot out the sky. They rained down on the elders like a downpour. The two elders formed a screen of light to block the stingers, but the bombardment showed no signs of stopping. They unleashed a wave of inner energy towards the scorpion's head, but it dissipated when the beast opened its mouth and released a dark green poisonous mist. The elders whirled around and hurried back to the internal members to protect them. As a group, they intertwined their inner energies to manifest a storm to disperse the mist. At the moment of impact, the ancient factions and island states' martial artists ran in opposite directions, leaving mass destruction in their wake. During the elimination round, the rules didn't restrict the items the participants brought into the jungle. They were free to bring whatever they wanted as long as they didn't exceed the specified weight. Many of them chose to bring their phones to communicate with their superiors. Sawyer reported the casualties in Bianca's team to Warhawk's parliament. The higher-ups were livid. "They're useless," Hilskin grumbled over the phone. "They failed a simple mission in Cadis, and now they're going to rank at the bottom of the competition." Sawyer was also at his wit's end. He was staying at the hotel on the island. If Bianca and her team suffered a crushing defeat, the guests' criticisms would be directed at him. "Why don't we make Bianca's team withdraw from the competition? We paid a huge sum for them. It'd be a waste if they died on the island." "Tell them not to engage with the other participants," Hilskin ordered. "If they encounter any opponents, just run." The three bosses behind Silver Shield Corporation and 9 States Financial Group were commanding the mercenary group from Warhawk. During the late stages of the competition, Bianca's team could assist them behind the scenes. With them working together, their chances of winning would be higher. Around 10 o'clock in the morning, a fleet from the countries of Warhawk and Maplewood appeared in the open sea near Cadis. They couldn't let the U.S. run wild in these waters. The U.S. had pressured Cadis before using this method, so Warhawk had deployed the same tactic. The administrative secretary of the military department called Stephen to report the situation. "What if we send out the Maritime Defense Force to deal with them?" Stephen asked. The secretary lowered her voice. "Confronting them won't solve the problem. We have to prevent a naval war from breaking out. Their warship's firepower covers the entire country of Cadis. Our projects in the country have only just started to take off. They'll be ruined if a war breaks out." Before the martial arts competition began, Kim had gone to Cadis to supervise various construction projects. Cadis was unofficially the United States' ally and part of their territory. After ending the call with the secretary, Stephen decided to return to Annapolis to discuss countermeasures with the big shots. "Kim, I'll be leaving the competition to Salim while I'm away. You don't have to worry about the participants acting up. We've sent up defensive measures around the island." "Are you going back to Annapolis?" "Yeah, there's a small problem in Cadis's international waters. I need to attend a meeting to discuss how to deal with them. It won't take long. I'll be back soon." "Okay, I'll be waiting for you." Kim walked Stephen out of the hotel, and he made his way to the port. When he arrived in the city, the Leviathan Unit's leader summoned him to his office. "Are you satisfied with the competition, Mr. Adams?" "It's going well. Your student is a martial artist with great potential." The Leviathan Unit's leader chuckled. "His foundation is solid, but he lacks combat experience. Hopefully, he'll gain some insight during the competition." "Is there any way to cause a contained natural disaster to wipe out the fleet from Warhawk and Maplewood without starting a war?" Stephen asked. The Leviathan Unit's leader considered his question. Ocean storms, tsunamis, and underwater volcanic eruptions, none of them would deal a fatal blow to the fleet. Martial artists were even less useful. Their warships weigh thousands of tons, and they're equipped with weapons to shoot down aircraft. They won't be destroyed that easily. What if we ask Dr. Dalton's team to create a mutant variant of a sea creature and have it attack the warships? I've checked the relevant information. The defenses of marine life can't resist heavy fire attacks. A warship is not the same as a regular transport ship. The two of them put their heads together and discussed for an hour, but they couldn't come up with a solution. Stephen decided to contact Tristan and Zane. It had been a while since he'd seen them. They were on the island for the competition. Zane had disappeared when the competition started. No one knew where he was. Maybe he was in the jungle, observing the participants. Tristan's lazy voice sounded from the phone. He was lying on the sand below a palm tree, savoring exotic fruits and taking in the beautiful scenery. "Are you causing trouble again? I don't have time for your antics. Who knows when Zane will go on a rampage?" "Calm down," Stephen said. "I'm calling because I have a question for you." During ancient times, there were many islands with abundant spiritual energy scattered throughout the ocean. Martial arts factions occupied the islands and built cities. The most famous one was Phantasma Isle. When their residents practiced martial arts, the island rose to a height of 30,000 feet. The illusion gave rise to all sorts of outlandish rumors. As a world-renowned thief, it was a given that this island was the target of Tristan's heists at some point. As the years passed, due to the geographical shift of the ocean, the islands gradually sank beneath the sea. Tristan mapped out Phantasma Isle's old location for Stephen. "Dive into the ocean and look for it. If you find it, activate its defensive array. The energy will surge towards the surface and obliterate the fleet." This sounded like a possible resolution to the tension on the ocean, but Stephen didn't have experience with underwater exploration. "Do you have a more detailed map?" "Stop joking around. It's been thousands of years. The land and oceans have all shifted since then." With that, Tristan hung up. It wasn't a precise location, but they were finally making some progress. Stephen took the Leviathan unit's leader with him to search for the island. There were limits to the submarine's descent, so he asked Dr. Dalton to genetically modify a whale. While Stephen waited, he reviewed the information about the conflict in international waters. Warhawk and Maplewood's joint fleets were strong, and Cadis was afraid of showing any signs of hostility towards them. As a result, their ports continued to carry out commercial activities. The fleet's survival depended on their resources. Pressuring the King of Cadis wouldn't help. Warhawk and Maplewood had been purchasing a large amount of resources from Cadis. International trade was already in a state of chaos. While Stephen waited for Dr. Dalton to complete his task, he monitored the competition on Mirage Island. A majority of the teams had suffered setbacks, and damage to the primitive jungle landscape was intensifying as the days passed. The four ancient martial arts factions were working together to eliminate the other teams. It didn't matter who won the prize. They were holding this martial arts competition to wipe out the hostile factions plotting against the US and the Tribulation sect. However, Zane was using this competition to find his enemies' descendants. Chaos would ensue if it turned out that his enemies were members of the four ancient factions. Stephen instructed Salim to find an opportunity to throw Zane off their tail and draw his attention elsewhere. Warhawk's mercenary group and the island state's martial artist had hidden themselves in the depths of the jungle. They were waiting for the end of the first round. When the time was up, they would automatically advance to the next round. Stephen gave Salim further instructions. "It's been several days since the competition started. We need to prepare for the next round. Every night at 8 p.m. sharp, use a holographic projector to project a screen in the sky above the jungle and show the locations of all the participants. If they don't want to fight, then lure them out of hiding with the vegetation." Later in the day, Dr. Dalton had good news for Stephen. He'd successfully implanted an AI chip in a whale. Hiding in its stomach and diving into the depths of the ocean wouldn't be a problem. Stephen met up with the Leviathan unit's leader and boarded a helicopter to the ocean. A sense of unease welled up inside Dr. Dalton as he watched the two big shots put on their oxygen masks. The belly of the whale wasn't a safe environment. Anything could happen inside. The oxygen tank could be damaged, or they could be dissolved by gastric acid if they weren't careful. "Mr. Adams, pay attention to the environment," Dr. Dalton warned. "If anything happens, blast through the whale's stomach to escape. Don't force yourself to dive. Stephen nodded. I understand, but if I don't take risks, we won't gain anything. I'll be careful. The Leviathan unit's leader was determined. No matter how this trip turned out, his priority was to ensure Stephen's safety. A pillar of water sprayed into the air from the back of the whale. It was a spectacular sight from above. Stephen pushed open the hatch of the helicopter and jumped down. The Leviathan unit's leader followed suit. When they fell into the ocean, the whale opened its mouth to swallow the water. They didn't resist and let themselves be pulled into its stomach. How do we know where it's going? The Leviathan unit's leader asked. There's no radar and no periscope. I left the illusory pearls outside, Stephen said. My optic nerves are connected to it. I have a full view of the ocean. The whale dove into the ocean as fast as it could, reaching a depth where the sunlight didn't shine. Through the gems, Stephen's vision was filled with pitch-black nothingness. The sand, shells, and remains of marine life accumulated at the bottom of the ocean day after day, year after year. Even Tristan didn't know how far Phantasma Isle had sunk. The whale's breathing is faster than before, which means the pressure of the sea is increasing, the Leviathan unit's leader said. We're getting close to the bottom. Stephen was impressed. You're quite experienced. My hobby is fishing. Stephen remotely controlled the 7 gems and sent them careening towards the bottom. They shone brightly in the pitch-black depths as they crashed into the ocean floor. A muffled explosion rang out. Stephen used the time it took for the gems to hit the bottom to deduce their location and how far they were above the ocean floor. As the whale swam along the rising and falling seabed, there were no signs of the island. Even martial artists who cultivated on the island in the past might not be able to find it now if they were alive. They were getting nowhere. The Leviathan unit's leader had a suggestion. We can't find the island on our own. Let's contact Dr. Dalton and have him release a group of genetically modified sea creatures to expand our search. Stephen agreed and used the communication device to relay the message to Dr. Dalton. Less than an hour later, patrol ships on the surface threw hundreds of turtles into the sea. Their hard shells warded off attacks from marine predators. The rapid currents at the bottom of the ocean pushed them toward the depths fairly quickly. Stephen and the Leviathan unit's leader waited patiently in the whale's stomach. After some time, the AI chips and the turtles finally had a reaction. 30 miles ahead of their current location was a trench in the ocean floor. Based on the unnatural shape and the smooth surfaces, it had been formed by a sword. When the whale swam to the trench, Stephen used the gems to observe the situation beyond the crack. The space was too small for the whale to swim through. We lost contact with the chip inside the turtle when it entered the trench. There might be something down here. It could be a defensive array cutting off communication. Are you going into the trench to check it out? The Leviathan unit's leader was an expert martial artist, but even he wasn't sure if exploring unknown territory at the bottom of the ocean was a good idea. Underwater battles came with uncertain factors, and if Phantasma Isle really was buried inside the trench, they would have to face a defensive array. There was also the crushing pressure of the ocean depths to worry about. Stephen was determined to explore the area. He positioned the gems above the trench. He couldn't see any marine creatures through the crack. The island sank into the ocean thousands of years ago. It was unlikely for an enemy to appear. If I activate the defensive array, the impact will crush the fleet. It won't be that easy, the Leviathan unit's leader said. We have less than 2 hours left in our oxygen tanks, and we don't know if we can resist the pressure of the depths. Let's give it a try for now. The two of them left the whale's stomach through its mouth and strengthened the barrier of inner energy. The tremendous pressure bore down on their bodies. The creaks of their bones and joints echoed in their ears. Stephen motioned to the turtles, and they gathered around him and the Leviathan unit's leader as an extra layer of defense. They swam towards the trench and entered the crack. It was dark, but as they went deeper, a light came into view. At the end of the path, they found themselves on top of a glass dome. There was a vacuum zone this deep in the ocean? Stephen asked. It's like a city's down there, and it's not submerged in water. This might be the island's defensive array, the Leviathan unit's leader replied. It'll be dangerous if we break in by force. Stephen placed his hand on the dome. The material was similar to glass or crystal. A steady glow of spiritual energy covered the surface. Beyond the dome was Phantasma Isle in its original glory. Flowers, trees, and houses were everywhere, and even the shadows of humans could be seen. The Leviathan unit's leader began to worry. If those are people, then they're martial artists from ancient times. It's likely that they're stronger than Tristan and Zane. Destroying the defensive array is not a good idea. Exploring an uninhabited island in the depths of the ocean was one thing, but an inhabited island that had been preserved for thousands of years was a serious risk. Before Stephen could agree, he discovered that his hand was stuck to the glass dome. The Leviathan unit's leader tried to pull his hand away, but the suction force increased and dragged the two of them beyond the dome. They landed on a sandy beach on the island with the deep sea above them. There were silhouettes of fish swimming in the waters, but not a single drop penetrated the dome. Before they could figure out what was going on, they were surrounded by a crowd of young men and women. "Who are you?" the young man in the lead demanded. "We were passing by when we were pulled into this island," Stephen said. "I hope you don't mind." The man in the lead, Ash, was a famous martial artist from ancient times. He wasn't pleased with Stephen's explanation. "What do you mean, passing by? The pressure of the deep sea weighs more than thousands of tons. Even if you didn't die, you still should have sustained some damage. Lying to us was a mistake. Don't blame us for being ruthless." Stephen was about to explain when Ash swung his blade. He was enveloped by a force stronger than a tsunami. He materialized his sword and parried the attack, sending sparks flying when their weapons clashed. The Leviathan unit's leader wanted to help, but Stephen shook his head. If he stepped in, the other residents of the island would step in too. That would be the end of them. Ash's technique utilized the rise and fall of the tides. Every time he attacked, he drew energy from the water above. The vast expanse of the ocean gave him an unlimited supply. Stephen was essentially fighting against the entire ocean. It was like a pebble hitting a mountain. "I thought you were someone special. Is this all you've got?" Ash asked. "We're just sparring," Stephen said. "There's no need for us to go all out." Ash aimed for his vitals with every strike. "Show me your true strength. It's been a while since I've had a fight for real." The onlookers clapped and cheered, treating the battle like it was some form of entertainment. "Okay, but don't blame me for what happens next." Stephen extracted the heat from the Killen's core and mixed it with his inner energy, forming a layer of flames on his skin. The fire brightened, and the heat intensified. The blinding light forced everyone to look away, including Ash. While he was shielding his eyes from the light, Stephen saw his chance and landed a punch on his abdomen. Ash staggered back and assessed his condition. He hadn't sustained any internal injuries. His opponent was deliberately going easy on him. He could have easily lopped off his head if he wanted to. Another young man jumped out from the crowd with a laugh. "Ash, your martial arts have deteriorated after all these years of doing nothing. It seems a carefree life isn't a good thing for martial artists. Let me take over." Ash glared at him. "A loss is a loss, Rhett. Why do you always have so much to say?" Stephen stepped back, glancing at the crowd. There were more than 100 residents standing around. If all of them came forward to challenge him, then when would this end? He didn't sense any killing intent from them. Maybe they were bored and just wanted to spar. Rhett walked over with a smile on his face. He became Stephen's second opponent. "Show me another one of your interesting techniques." "I don't have time to fight." "Then why are you here? Are you planning to steal Phantasma Isle's treasures and legacy?" Rhett's eyes narrowed. "Or do you want to destroy the island?" Stephen swallowed nervously. If he told them his original plan, they would gang up on him without a doubt. What if they lost their minds out of anger and destroyed the defensive array? Tons of seawater would pour into the island, burying everyone alive in the ocean depths. "How many challengers do you have left? Why don't you attack me together? I don't have much time to spare." "We don't like bullying the weak. Besides, we don't have to fight right now. After our spar, let's sit down and have a talk." That was the answer Stephen was looking for. Rhett was unarmed, so to even the playing field, he waved his sword out of existence and swung his fist. He landed more than one punch, but none of it did any damage. It felt like he was facing off against a rubber tire. Theoretically speaking, if Rhett was absorbing the damage with his defenses alone, the ground would still have cracked from the impact, but nothing happened. Rhett let out a laugh. You'd better take out your weapon. This is hardly a fight. Stephen materialized his sword again. Flames ran down the length of the blade. He stabbed Rhett in the stomach, but his blade didn't run him through, nor were there any signs of burning flesh. Stephen tried to pull his sword out, but it was lodged inside Rhett's body, like a steel bar inserted into concrete. He resorted to manifesting a dragon of fire. It opened its mouth and spewed a torrent of flames towards Rhett, sending him crashing to the ground. Rhett jumped to his feet as quickly as he fell. His body was trained to resist all kinds of weapons, equipment, and artifacts, making him practically impenetrable. He raised his arm to block Stephen's sword and swung a punch with his free hand. Stephen was knocked back. He frowned in disgust at the layer of oil covering his skin and clothes. When he was about to attack again, he realized that his skin was burning, but not from his own fire. As the flames licked his skin, his inner energy drained out of him. That's a special oil created from my technique, Rhett explained. It uses a small amount of inner energy as fuel to burn. It won't be easy to put out. Stephen's energy was rapidly draining. He cast his domain of hellfire, which followed a similar principle. The blue flames attracted the fire away from his skin. Rhett threw another punch, but Stephen dodged to the side. Fighting head-on wasn't effective. He had to find another way to counter Rhett's defenses. He tossed his 7 gems into the air, generating a magnetic force. The sand was mixed with iron and other metal fragments, which were instantly attracted into the gems and condensed into chains. Rhett's defenses were high, but he wasn't as agile. That became his biggest weakness. The chains wrapped around him, securing him in place. When he tried to destroy them, any damage he caused was repaired in a heartbeat. The gems continued to extract metals from the sand. In the end, Rhett was bundled in a blanket of chains, and the residents of the island laughed at him. He surrendered. Let's end the spar here. Sure, it wasn't a fair fight anyway, Stephen said. I won because of my weapon. No one could find fault with him when he was being so modest. Rhett didn't care about his defeat. He was satisfied with the spar. As the chains fell apart, and fragments of metal mixed with the sand once more, the residents of the island approached Stephen and the Leviathan unit's leader for a chat. It had been a long time since they'd seen a new face. Ash introduced himself and asked Stephen why he was here. My companion and I encountered an enemy we couldn't defeat on the surface, so we dived into the ocean. We found a crack at the bottom of the sea and decided to hide on the island for a while. I never expected to find the famous Phantasma Isle preserved this deep in the ocean. You must be members of ancient martial arts factions from thousands of years ago. Stephen's words were 30% truth and 70% false. Either way, it was impossible for the residents to discern the truth from the lies. The residents nodded in understanding with nostalgic expressions on their face when they heard Stephen mention the surface. Welcome to the island, Ash said with a smile. Let's get along in the future. After all, we'll be staying here for the rest of our lives. Maybe forever. Stephen exchanged an astonished glance with the Leviathan unit's leader. What? We weren't planning to stay for that long. They both looked up at the glass dome and had the same realization. The defensive array couldn't be deactivated at will. Ash noticed the shock on their faces and explained without hiding anything. The residents weren't affiliated with the ancient martial arts factions, and Phantasma Isle wasn't their home. During a chaotic battle in ancient times, they were captured and brought here as captives. When a powerful enemy appeared on the island, the head of the martial arts faction took his fellow members and escaped. Before leaving, he destroyed the island's foundation, making it sink into the bottom of the ocean. The glass dome was a restrictive array that he had set up to prevent the captives from escaping. As for how strong the head of the faction was, there was no way for Stephen and the Leviathan unit's leader to accurately determine his strength. But they couldn't sit around and wait for death. You can't get out, Ash said. We've tried everything. That array can't be broken. Stephen and the Leviathan unit's leader didn't pay attention to him. If we don't try, how would we know? They leaped towards the glass dome and launched a collective attack using 80% of their combined strength. A deafening explosion and a blinding light rattled the dome. Even the water above was shaken. But when the dust settled, the dome was intact, a perfect isolation of two spatial zones. Not a single crack had appeared. When Stephen and the Leviathan unit's leader landed on the ground dejectedly, Rhett walked over and comforted them. "We've been trapped here for a long time. We've tried everything there is to try. You should just give up. It's a waste of energy. Why don't you tell us how much the world has changed since our time?" Stephen ran a hand through his hair in frustration. Was this some kind of joke? If news of the Sovereign's disappearance were to spread, an alliance of their neighboring countries would appear at their borders the very next day. The U.S. would be thrown into turmoil. "We have to leave. Pack your things and get ready. I'll think of a way to destroy the dome." The crowd shook their heads with a sigh and dispersed. There was no getting out of here. The island was an independent ecosystem, and there was an endless supply of food and water. They wouldn't starve to death even if they stayed here forever. The Leviathan unit's leader took out his communication device. There was sufficient battery and a signal. There was hope in getting off the island. "I'll contact my subordinates and ask them to send a submarine to break through the array with force. The array has been in place for a long time. There should be weaknesses in its formation." When the Maritime Defense Force of the Eastern Port received an order from the Leviathan unit's leader, they immediately sent out a submarine and advanced at full speed to the ocean depths while avoiding detection from Warhawk and Maplewood's fleet. After waiting for more than 2 hours, the captain's voice sounded from the communication device. "Mr. Adams, your location is too deep for our submarine to dive any further." "I understand. In your position, will it be possible for the attack to land even with the currents in the ocean?" "It'll be fine as long as it doesn't deviate too far from the target." The captain was in a dilemma. Reaching the bottom of the ocean in a submarine was an impossible task, and aiming at a specific target was even harder. He could only tell Stephen the truth. "The environment is complicated to navigate. We'll have to rely on the computer to operate the firepower. Hopefully, the attack will be as accurate as possible. Would you like us to begin?" Stephen and the Leviathan unit's leader had been waiting for hours. They didn't want to stay here for another minute. They gave the order to attack. A cabin door at the bottom of the submarine opened, and a bomb shaped like a gas barrel dropped towards the trench below. The dome had accumulated a layer of sand and dirt over the years, and it was hardened into a layer of rock. The first bomb was a test run. Afterwards, the captain and his crew would be able to adjust the location and launch a more accurate attack. Ash and Rhett, who'd been waiting with Stephen and the Leviathan unit's leader, had never seen a communication device before. They also didn't understand the complicated terms they used. Before they could ask, an explosion shook the array, removing the hardened layer of rock. The rolling waves of the sea came into view. Ash and Rhett were dumbfounded. "What did you two do? Did you summon martial artists from another dimension to break the array together?" Stephen didn't have time to explain the principle of modern weapons to them. He simply nodded. Ash and Rhett ran to the houses in the distance to gather the residents and prepare to leave. Their long-awaited dream of returning to the surface would be fulfilled today. When the explosion died down, the Leviathan unit's leader picked up his communication device to update the captain. "The array isn't weakening. The island is only slightly shaking from the aftermath. We could mobilize stronger weapons, but I don't know if we'll be able to guarantee Mr. Adams' safety." Launching an attack was as easy as pressing a button, but the destruction was out of their hands. If anything happened to the Sovereign and he was killed, their lives would be forfeit. The Leviathan unit's leader was impatient. "Forget about that. Use all the weapons you have." He ended the communication, and another explosion rattled the dome above. The United States Navy had unlimited ammunition, and the production lines of military factories on land provided backline protection. It was only a matter of time before the array was destroyed. Rhett was standing on a hill in the distance, waving his hands and shouting. "Do you need help? We can launch an attack from the inside." "Do it!" Stephen yelled back. "Don't hold anything back!" The dense crowd leaped into the air with their weapons. Their combined attack set off an intense explosion that released shockwaves seeping through the island. The flowers and trees were uprooted, and the houses collapsed one by one. Even the boulders were turned to dust. The Leviathan unit's leader pointed at the dome. "Look over there, Mr. Adams. There are cracks on the array." Stephen closed his eyes and reached out with his aura to sense the whale they'd left in the ocean depths. When the seawater poured in, the only way to reach the surface was to hide inside its stomach. A series of explosions tore a hole through the dome. Water rushed inside the opening and spilled onto the island like a waterfall. The impatient residents tried to escape through the gap, but the flowing waters pushed them back. Even the strongest of martial artists and their techniques were insignificant in the face of nature. Stephen waved for them to come down. "Come here! Our transportation will be here soon! I'll take you with me!" As the residents landed on the beach, the Leviathan unit's leader ordered the captain of the submarine to stop attacking. The opening widened, and water surged into the island like a raging tide. The whale followed the flow and was swept inside. It fell into the rapidly accumulating water and floated on the surface, opening its mouth. The residents stopped in their tracks, cautiously eyeing the gaping interior of the whale's mouth. "Are you telling us to walk into that? We'll become its next meal." "This is my..." Stephen scrambled to find the correct term. AI chip, biochemical technology, and genetic modification weren't in their vocabulary. "This whale is my beast mount. I tamed it. Trust me, it's not dangerous. Use your inner energy to shield yourselves before going in. If we hide in its stomach, it'll take us to the surface. It's now or never. If you stay, you'll be killed by the pressure of the ocean or die from lack of oxygen." The residents watched in utter disbelief as Stephen and the Leviathan unit's leader disappeared inside the massive whale. Ash and Rhett gave a quick, persuasive speech to the residents, and everyone burrowed inside its stomach. The submarine sped towards the area of the ocean, while the warships on the surface headed back to the port. The dome completely collapsed, and a golden pillar of light spanning more than 5 miles shot out from the ocean and into the sky. A destructive force reached the surface and exploded within the area of Warhawk and Maplewood's fleet. One aftershock came after another, overturning their warships and damaging them. Their country's satellites hadn't received information of an impending disaster on the ocean, and the sudden crisis caught them off guard. The seawater was heating to a boiling point. The captain of the submarine told Stephen about the situation through the communication device. "We can't surface in this area. The waters are too hot, and Warhawk and Maplewood's fleet will spot us and shoot us down." Adrenaline was coursing through Stephen's veins. He'd narrowly avoided an eternity trapped at the bottom of the ocean. "We'll take a detour to the other side. Take the lead. The whale will follow behind." The residents of the island were at a loss. They'd broken out of Phantasma Isle's shackles and regained their freedom. It had been thousands of years, and the outside world was sure to have changed drastically. Ash poked Stephen in the arm to get his attention. "Thank you for everything you've done for us. Can you find a place for us to stay?" "Sure. You're used to island life, so I've already thought of a suitable location. You don't have to worry about food and accommodation. When you've adjusted to society, you can travel to other countries and see the world for yourself." When the residents were attacking the dome, Stephen had sensed their true strength. They were a unique combat force, and having them on their side was a win-win situation for both parties. Several hours later, the submarine and the whale finally arrived at Mirage Island's port. Stephen led the residents on shore. The sun was radiant, and the island was dazzling, and the waters were glistening. The residents inhaled deeply to take in the fresh air, feeling like they were reborn. Before Stephen came along, they thought they'd be trapped at the bottom of the ocean forever and never see the sun again. The Leviathan unit members were gathered in a crowd, waiting for orders. Stephen introduced Ash and Rhett's group. "I've sent you the coordinates to an island. These are my friends. Take them there and don't let outsiders find out about them. Arrange accommodations for them and teach them how to adjust to modern society." The residents could tell that Stephen was someone important by the size of the crowd and his authoritative demeanor. It would be in their best interest to go along with it and not cause any trouble. A vacation home had been prepared for them. They were free to plant vegetables, chop wood, and raise all kinds of livestock in the mountains nearby. Ash and Rhett expressed their most sincere thanks once again. "Mr. Adams, we've only just met, but you've treated us with unconditional kindness. Let us know if you need anything in the future. We'll do our best to help you." Stephen gave them a friendly smile. "You don't have to be so formal with me. We're all friends here. Think of this as one friend looking out for another. Stephen sent a small group of Leviathan unit members to the island and went back to Mirage Island to meet up with Kim to watch the rest of the first round. Kim was worried when she read the news that a sudden explosion had been triggered in the middle of the ocean. An earthquake or volcanic eruption at the bottom of the sea took place in the area where Stephen was carrying out his mission. Was this a coincidence, or had something serious happened? While her thoughts were spiraling, Stephen returned to their room unharmed. She was relieved to see that he was okay. The ocean is scary. 80% of Warhawk and Maplewood's combined forces were vaporized by the eruption. The fighter jets and helicopters were also blown away by the hot air. Stephen took his seat at the dining table and poured a glass of wine. Isn't that a good thing? That disaster resolved our problems. They won't be sending their fleet to Cadis's international waters again anytime soon. That's not what I meant, Kim said with a frown. I'm worried about you. You could have been caught up in that. Stephen sat next to her and put an arm around her shoulder. There's nothing to worry about. Martial artists need to cultivate to get stronger. Anyway, I'm back now. Let's watch the live broadcast together. While Stephen was away, Salim had been controlling the vegetation to assist the 4 ancient martial arts factions. They could wipe out almost any team with their combined teamwork. The Leviathan unit's intelligence personnel had noticed 2 unusual teams. They were from an unknown area in northern Europe and Africa. Salim speculated that they found a random empty shell company to list as their affiliation and signed up for the competition. They didn't engage with the other participants, and they acted alone. Stephen reviewed the names on the list. If even the Leviathan unit couldn't find any information on their background, where could they have come from? Most countries and wealthy families have a team of martial artists they train in secret, Salim replied. It's not unusual. In any case, the final winner is none of our concern. Zane will take care of everything. As if on cue, Tristan and Zane came knocking on their door. Finding the descendants of an enemy from thousands of years ago was far-fetched to begin with. Zane was adamant about taking his revenge, and he wouldn't accept lack of information for an answer. Fortunately, Zane had already found his suspects, and they weren't members of the ancient martial arts factions. He handed 2 photos to Stephen. These 2 participants used special techniques. It's likely that these techniques were passed down by my enemy. Okay, let's wait for an opportunity. Why? The jungle's terrain is complicated. I can just sneak in and deal with them. Stephen looked at Zane, or rather, his body that was created from biochemical technology. It had its limitations, and Zane was a remnant will of his spiritual energy left behind from ancient times. His 2 suspects were from the African team, and their names were San and Juma. It was obvious that their names were fake, and they were hiding their real background. They'd signed up for the competition with ulterior motives. It would be dangerous if Zane went after them alone without knowing what he was up against. Stephen scrolled through the information on his computer to review their battle streak. From the beginning of the competition to now, they'd barely made a move. The most they'd done was injure a few of the participants. He turned back to Zane, who was impatiently waiting for his answer. I'll send my people to monitor them. Wait until the final challenges begin. And when is that going to happen? Zane demanded. Back when he ascended to the true immortal realm, his enemies had ambushed him and killed him. If it weren't for his resentment and lingering regrets, he would have died along with his body a long time ago. His hatred for them hadn't diminished in the slightest. Tomorrow at noon, Stephen said, making the decision on the spot. Today would be the last night of the elimination round. They had to increase the numbers of the hostile factions as much as possible, and the leader of the Leviathan unit's student, Liam, was the best person for the job. Stephen wanted to go with them, but he'd been away for a while, so he decided to stay with Kim for the night. She prepared a seafood hot pot for dinner. Her skills with the knife had improved, and the seasoning was just right. Your cooking is getting better and better. You would have known that if you spent more time at home and ate my cooking 3 meals a day, Kim teased. Stephen awkwardly looked away and turned his attention to the broadcast. Liam's first target was Warhawk's mercenary team. The fleet in Cadis's international waters had suffered heavy losses, and Warhawk's higher-ups didn't have the energy to care about the competition anymore. There were only 8 members left in the team. The captain had been killed, and none of them were in the mood to continue with the competition. They were only sticking around because of the pressure. A sudden glint of a blade flashed behind the mercenaries. They jumped to their feet and avoided a fatal blow. Black wooden totems rained from the sky. Liam hid his figure above the pillars, waiting for an opportunity to strike. The first mercenary didn't notice him. He drew his sword to destroy the totems, but before he could make a move, a blade ran through him. He died instantly without making a sound. Liam flicked the blood from his blade. "It's been so many days since I warned you to leave. Looks like you're determined to die in this jungle." The mercenaries were intimidated by the ambush at first, but their concerns dissipated when they found that their opponent was alone. "You're brave for starting a fight by yourself, but you're not no match for all of us." The remaining 7 team members reacted fast. They surrounded Liam and aimed for his vitals from every angle. The totems hovering in the air circled him, forming a barrier. The mercenaries' swords cut the totems to pieces with one swing, but a mysterious force was attached to the fragments. When the totems shattered, the wooden shards shot out in random directions. 2 of the mercenaries were standing too close and couldn't dodge in time. They raised their arms to protect their heads and torsos. The shards left deep dashes on their skin, exposing the bone underneath. The other mercenaries ran over to check on them. The mysterious force attached to the totems had entered their bodies, and their wounds were turning into wood. "Is this an illusion?" "Don't be stupid. The flow of our spiritual energy is normal. This is real." One of the mercenaries mustered up the courage to touch their injuries. They were hard and rough like tree bark. The blood flow had stopped. "They're turning into wood." Liam didn't give them time to chat. He sent his remaining totems flying toward them. The mercenaries had learned their lesson. They leaped backwards as far as they could and manifested their phantoms to destroy the totems from a distance. Stephen was impressed with Liam's skill set. His offense and defense were top-notch. The Leviathan unit's leader taught him a lot of unique techniques. I wonder where he found those strange wooden constructs. I remember you told me the Leviathan unit's leader offered his scroll to you and volunteered to teach you some of its techniques, Kim said. Maybe this was one of them. Yeah, maybe. The leader and I have an age gap. He outranks me in terms of seniority. If he teaches me his martial arts, that means I'll become a student. I don't know how to feel about having the Leviathan unit's leader as my teacher. Liam's blade pierced 2 of the mercenaries' throats. His strikes were lightning fast and merciless. The remaining 3 mercenaries felt their blood turn cold. Warhawk's biochemical technology had progressed, but they hadn't improved the regenerative abilities that came with it. When the mercenaries were wounded, their injuries stimulated the cells to split rapidly. The number of cell divisions in a lifetime was limited, and the past few days of intense conflict had pushed their regeneration to the brink. The 3 mercenaries ran towards the edge of the jungle at full speed. They didn't know how they were going to explain their failure to their superiors, but their lives were more important. They manifested 3 vultures and escaped the jungle with their claws digging into their shoulders. Warhawk's mercenary group had lost their qualifications to proceed to the next round. Liam had flawlessly kicked them out of the competition without breaking a sweat. The Leviathan unit had been monitoring most of the participants, but some of them were elusive, like the 2 teams from Northern Europe and Africa. They were scattered across the jungle. At this time, the 4 ancient martial arts factions were dealing with a swarm of rats. The elder from the Bloodfiend Valley condensed a wave of blood. This was a famous technique that the Bloodfiend Valley was known for. A fraction of the rats were dissolved. Not even their bones were left behind. There's no end to them. Why are they targeting us? The other elders and the internal members were also exasperated. They'd been harassed by the strange vegetation and aggressive beasts for the past few days, and there was no sign of the first round ending. If this continued, they would die of exhaustion. Some of the internal members had been bitten by the rats. Help had arrived minutes later, and they were brought out of the jungle to receive professional treatment. "Let's keep moving and try to get these rats away from us," one of the elders suggested. "Maybe the other participants are experiencing the same thing." 15 miles later, they ran into the Tribulation sect. The 4 cardinals, Diana, Miles, Percy, and Pedro, were eager for a fight. They regarded the 4 ancient factions as their prey. "Did you come here to die? Your courage is commendable." The elders threw him a dirty look. "You're just scum from the Tribulation sect. Today we'll get rid of you once and for all." "Don't point fingers when you don't know anything about our faction. We have a purpose, and our ambition is far greater than yours will ever be." As if sensing the impending battle, the rats stopped their pursuit and burrowed into the soil, disappearing from sight. The elders and the cardinals were done bickering. They drew their weapons and launched a fierce attack. The other members stood in formation on the side, waiting for a chance to step in. The Bloodfiend Valley's elder condensed a dark red cloud above, and a corrosive drizzle of blood fell from the night sky. The Hidden Cloud Temple's elder manifested a golden statue. Cracks appeared on the ground as it landed. Pedro laughed in disdain. "Aren't you ashamed of your petty tricks? If I were you, I would hide in a corner and never show my face in public again." "You think you're superior because of that broken piece of scrap metal in your hands?" the Spectre Cemetery's elder retorted as he summoned skeletons. "It's nothing but a failed imitation of the sacred manual." Both parties were familiar with each other's techniques. The skeletons initiated the attack, while the cardinals used their talismans to suppress the Hidden Cloud Temple statue. In the blink of an eye, both sides had exchanged 500 blows, and they were evenly matched. Stephen took out the device from the Leviathan unit. At the rate this was going, their battle would continue for days on end. The trees nearby rustled when they received the order. The leaves floated in the air, targeting the 4 cardinals. A barrage of leaves as sharp as blades interrupted their momentum. The Tribulation sect members standing at the side activated their talismans, forming a barrier of fire to burn the leaves. The cardinals cursed under their breath. "Those damn trees are acting up again." For the first time since they entered the jungle, the elders were grateful for the vegetation that had a mind of its own. "If you're afraid, you can surrender. We'll spare your lives." Of course, the cardinals weren't one to give up. They threw their talismans at the elders, and another fight broke out. Their intense battle released shockwaves that swept the jungle. There were participants hiding in the area, planning to take advantage of the chaos to deal a finishing blow when the time was right. But they gave up on the idea. The battle was too destructive. Their lives would be at risk if they got involved. The storm of leaves were burnt to a crisp, and the talismans unleashed balls of fire that rained down on the surrounding trees. The jungle erupted in flames, lighting up the night sky. Stephen pulled up the footage from the reconnaissance aircraft on his computer to search for any beasts that could assist the ancient factions. He found large rhinos soaking in the mud pit nearby. When he pressed the button on the device, the rhinos stood up from the mud and rushed towards the battlefield. The ground shook from their stampede. Just as the Tribulation sect was wondering about the tremors, 20 rhinos dashed out of the forest and headed straight for them. Their horns were as sharp as weapons, and the talismans were sent flying before they could activate its effect. Some of the Tribulation sect members who had no time to dodge were knocked back so hard that their bones fractured. Their swords only left a shallow scratch on the rhino's hide. The elders seized the opportunity and instructed their internal members to launch a counterattack. They tossed their swords into the air. The formation circled the skies before coming down on the Tribulation sect members with a destructive momentum. The Peach Blossom War's elder condensed the moonlight into a translucent lotus flower. It enhanced the strength of the Hidden Cloud Temple statue before joining the swords in the attack.